In a city of 10 million stories, a single number written on a piece of paper can change everything. For Jonathan Adler, a man who measured his life in billions, that number was 0. He left a $0 tip on a $487 bill, a casual act of arrogance he wouldn't remember by the time his limousine door closed. But for the waitress, Jessica Miller, that 0 was a symbol of a lifetime of struggle. What Jonathan didn't know was that this wasn't their first interaction. Their paths had crossed decades before, in a moment of betrayal that built his empire and shattered her world. Hours later, a simple forgotten object would unravel a secret, forcing a titan of industry to confront the devastating truth of the woman he had so carelessly dismissed. The air in The Gilded Sparrow was thick with the scent of truffle oil and quiet money. Conversations were murmurs, the clinking of silverware on porcelain, a delicate symphony of wealth. At a corner table shielded by a pane of glass that offered a sweeping view of the Manhattan skyline, sat Jonathan Adler. He wasn't admiring the view. His world was compressed into the tiny glowing rectangle of his phone, pressed hard against his ear. "No, Paulson, I don't care about the regulatory hurdles." He rasped his voice, a low growl that cut through the restaurant's genteel hum. "Project Chimera is a legacy acquisition. We don't stumble at the finish line. Make it happen." He stabbed at his plate of seared scallops with a fork, his movements sharp and impatient. At 62, Jonathan Adler was a man forged in the crucible of corporate warfare. His face was a roadmap of ruthless decisions and sleepless nights. His silver hair was impeccably styled. His suit, a custom-tailored Xenia, was worth more than the car most people drove. He was the founder and CEO of Adler Innovations, a tech behemoth that had its tendrils in everything from satellite communications to AI-driven logistics. He was a king in his kingdom of glass and steel. His waitress approached the table with the practiced invisibility of someone who spent 8 hours a day navigating the egos of the powerful. "Is everything to your liking, Mr. Adler?" She asked, her voice calm and even. Jonathan didn't look up. He waved a dismissive hand. "It's fine. The risotto is bland. Just bring the check." The waitress, Jessica Miller, nodded slightly, her expression unreadable. She had seen men like him 1,000 times. Men who saw service staff not as people, but as functions extensions of the table and chairs. She retrieved the leather billfold and placed it discreetly on the table. Jonathan ended his call with a curt, "Fix it," and tossed the phone onto the table. He glanced at the bill, $487.50, a rounding error in his daily expenses. He pulled out a sleek, black corporate card, dropped it into the folder, and pushed it to the edge of the table without a second thought. Jessica returned a moment later, processed the card, and brought back the slip for his signature. She stood a respectful distance away as he scribbled a jagged line that passed for his name. He then drew a thick, definitive slash through the tip and total, lines writing $487.50 again at the bottom. He didn't add a single cent. He didn't even make eye contact. He simply stood up, adjusted his suit jacket, and strode out of the restaurant, his mind already on the next corporate battle. Jessica picked up the billfold. She saw the aggressive line, the unapologetic 0. A familiar coldness settled in her stomach. It wasn't the first time this had happened, but tonight it felt different. It felt personal. That 487th bill represented 4 tables' worth of tips on a slow Tuesday night. Tips she desperately needed. Her mother's prescription for her heart condition was due for a refill, and the rent was already 3 days late. Her co-worker, a fellow waitress named Chloe, sidled up to the busing station. "Let me guess, Mr. Monopoly stiffed you." Jessica forced a tight smile and tore the merchant copy from the slip. He drew the line through the tip like he was vetoing a bill in Congress. "Jerk," Chloe muttered, shaking her head. "I don't get it. A guy that rich, what's $100 to him? It's everything to us." "It's not about the money," Jessica said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's about telling you that you're worthless, that your time, your effort, it adds up to zero." She carefully folded the receipt and put it in her apron, the sharp crease in the paper feeling like a tiny cut. As she began clearing the table, her hand brushed against something hard and cool on the floor beneath where Jonathan had been sitting. She reached down and picked it up. It was a pen, but not just any pen. It was heavy crafted from polished obsidian, with a single elegant silver band around the middle. It felt impossibly expensive. Unscrewing the cap, she saw the nib was gold, and engraved in minuscule letters on the silver band was an inscription, J.A. The first step is the hardest. D.M. A strange feeling washed over her. J.A. was obviously Jonathan Adler, but D.M. The initials tugged at a distant, painful memory, a ghost she spent her entire life trying to outrun. Shaking her head to clear it, she slipped the pen into her pocket. He would probably send someone for it. And when he did, she would be ready. Jonathan Adler's limousine sliced through the neon-lit veins of New York City. The smooth leather and silent interior were a world away from the restaurant, but he felt an unfamiliar agitation prickling under his skin. The Chimera deal was proving more difficult than he'd anticipated. His rivals at Cygnus Corp were putting up a fight, and his own board was getting nervous. He rubbed his temples, the phantom taste of the bland risotto still in his mouth. He reached into his breast pocket for his pen to jot down a note, a habit ingrained over 40 years of business. His fingers met only the fine wool of his suit. He patted his other pockets, a frown creasing his brow. Nothing. "Robert," he said into the intercom. His assistant's voice came through crisp and immediate. "Yes, Mr. Adler." "My pen. The obsidian one. I seem to have misplaced it." A pause. Robert Coleman knew the pen. It was the one Jonathan used to sign every major deal, a talisman of his success. "Were you using it at the restaurant, sir?" "I don't know. Maybe. I signed the bill." Jonathan grumbled, replaying the last few minutes in his head. The annoying waitress, the check, the scrawled signature. He had used his own pen. He must have dropped it. "Damn it," he cursed under his breath. The pen was more than just an expensive writing instrument. It was the last link to a part of his life he had buried long ago. "Turn the car around, Frank," he commanded the driver. Then to Robert. "Call the restaurant, the Gilded Sparrow. Tell them I left a valuable pen at table 12. Have them hold it for me. I'll send you in to get it." "Right away, sir." Jonathan leaned his head back against the seat, closing his eyes. The initials on the pen floated in his mind's eye. D.M. David Miller. The ghost he never spoke of. His first partner. His best friend. The man whose life he had systematically dismantled to build his own. He hadn't thought of David in years, not consciously. But the pen, a gift from David on the day they'd secured their first round of funding, was a constant subconscious reminder. David had believed in him, and he had repaid that belief with the deepest betrayal imaginable. Meanwhile, back at the Gilded Sparrow, Jessica was finishing her shift. The pen sat heavy in her pocket. The manager, a perpetually stressed man named Mr. Dubois, approached her as she was clocking out. "Miller, a call for you." "Well, for the restaurant about you," he clarified. "Some assistant for that charming gentleman at table 12. Adler. Says he left a pen. Did you find it?" Jessica's spine straightened. "Yes, I did." "Well, his man is on his way to pick it up. Wait for him. They sound like they're in a hurry." Dubois scurried off before she could protest. Jessica waited by the front reception desk, her feet aching, her mind racing. DM David Miller, her father's name. It had to be a coincidence, a cruel, twisted coincidence. Her father was a brilliant, kind software engineer who died of a broken heart and a massive coronary when she was 12. He wasn't the kind of man who would know a titan like Jonathan Adler. Or was he? Her mother Helen rarely spoke of the years before the collapse. It was a time of pain, a locked room in their family's history. She only knew that her father had a business partner who betrayed him, stealing their shared dream and leaving him with nothing. She never knew the partner's name. Her mother had refused to utter it, as if the name itself was a curse. A few minutes later, a well-dressed man in his late 30s with a harried expression entered the restaurant. This was Robert Coleman. He spotted Jessica immediately. "You're the waitress from table 12, he asked, his tone professional but polite. "I am," Jessica replied, her gaze steady. "My employer, Mr. Adler, left his pen. I believe you found it." Jessica reached into her pocket and produced the obsidian pen, holding it in her palm. It looked small and insignificant, yet felt like it held the weight of the world. Robert let out a sigh of relief. "Excellent. Mr. Adler is very attached to it." He reached into his own pocket and pulled out a thick money clip. He peeled off 5 $100 bills. "For your trouble and your honesty." He held the money out to her. It was more than she had made in the entire shift. It was the prescription money. It was a week's worth of groceries. It was a lifeline. Jessica looked at the cash, then back at Robert's expectant face. She thought of the 0 on the receipt. She thought of the dismissive wave of Jonathan Adler's hand. And she thought of the initials DM that burned in her mind. Slowly she closed her hand around the pen and took a step back. "No, thank you," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Robert blinked, surprised. "I'm sorry. I don't want his money," she said. "You can tell Mr. Adler that his pen is safe. He can come and get it himself. And when he does, he can bring the respect he forgot to leave on the table earlier." Robert Coleman was floored. He had spent 10 years as Jonathan Adler's right-hand man. He had seen people grovel, seen them flatter, seen them crumble under Adler's immense pressure. He had never not once seen anyone defy him, let alone a waitress in a mid-tier restaurant. He stared at the young woman before him. She was tired, you could see it in her eyes. But there was a fire there, too. A strength that the $500 couldn't touch. I see," Robert stammered, putting the money away. "I will relay your message." He turned and walked out, his mind reeling. This was going to be an interesting conversation. The limousine idled by the curb, a silent black shark in the river of yellow cabs. Robert Coleman slid back into the plush interior, his face a mask of carefully controlled neutrality. "Well," Jonathan Adler demanded, not opening his eyes. "Do you have it?" "No, sir." Jonathan's eyes snapped open. "No? What do you mean, no? Did she lose it? Did she sell it? I'll have her fired. She has it, sir," Robert interrupted, bracing himself. "She refused to give it to me." The silence in the car was suddenly deafening. Jonathan stared at his assistant, as if he'd just started speaking in tongues. "She refused?" "Yes, sir. I offered her $500 for her trouble. She declined." Jonathan was baffled. It was an emotion so foreign to him it was physically uncomfortable. "She declined. Why?" Robert chose his next words very carefully. She said, and I quote, "Tell Mr. Adler that his pen is here. He can come and get it himself. And when he does, he can bring the respect he forgot to leave on the table earlier." Jonathan Adler didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply stared out the window at the blurred lights of the city. The audacity of it was breathtaking. It was so completely outside the realm of his experience that he almost felt a flicker of admiration. It was quickly replaced by irritation. Who did this woman think she was? What's her name? He asked, his voice dangerously low. I asked the manager on my way out, sir. Her name is Jessica Miller. The name hit Jonathan Adler like a physical impact. Miller. It was a common enough name, of course, a meaningless coincidence, but combined with the DM on the pen, the blood in his veins seemed to turn to ice. He felt a tremor in his hand, a weakness he hadn't felt since he was a young man facing down his first hostile board. Miller. He repeated the name, tasting like ash in his mouth. It couldn't be. David was gone. He had read the short, sterile obituary notice in the business pages 20 years ago. David Miller, 45, former software architect. No mention of their company, no mention of him. Wiped clean from the record. David had a wife, Helen. Did they have children? He vaguely recalled David mentioning a baby on the way, just before everything went sour. A girl, he thought. Robert, Jonathan said, his voice strained. Get me everything you can on a Jessica Miller who works at the Gilded Sparrow. I want a full workup. Employment history, family education, financial status, everything. I want it on my desk by morning. Sir, Robert hesitated. This seemed an extreme reaction over a pen and a slighted waitress. Now, Robert, Jonathan snapped his composure, cracking. And cancel my 9 o'clock. I'm going home. As the limousine sped towards his sterile penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, Jonathan Adler felt like a man haunted. For 2 decades he had successfully compartmentalized his past. The betrayal of David Miller was a necessary, albeit regrettable, foundation stone of his empire. It was just business. He had told himself that 1,000,000 times. Business was a brutal game, and the sentimental didn't survive. But tonight the walls of that compartment were crumbling. The defiant face of a tired waitress, a name, a set of initials on a pen, they were chisels chipping away at the stone, threatening to release the ghost he had locked away so long ago. He arrived at his apartment, a cavernous space of chrome glass and art that was curated to project power, not comfort. He bypassed the fully stocked bar and went straight to his study. From a locked drawer in his antique mahogany desk, he retrieved a small, worn, leather-bound photo album. It was the only personal memento he kept from his early years. He blew a thin layer of dust from the cover and opened it. There they were, 2 young men in their 20s, grinning foolishly in a cluttered garage that smelled of solder and stale coffee. He, Jonathan, was thin, hungry, with a fire in his eyes. And beside him was David Miller, his arm slung over Jonathan's shoulder. David, with his kind eyes, his unruly brown hair, and his easy smile. He was the genius, the brilliant coder who could make a machine sing. Jonathan was the strategist, the salesman, the one who could see the path to power. They were invincible. They were going to change the world together. He turned the page. A photo of David and a pretty dark-haired woman, Helen. They were laughing so deeply in love. Another page. A photo of David holding a tiny swaddled bundle. A daughter. Jonathan slammed the album shut. The past was a foreign country, and he was an unwelcome visitor. He couldn't go back. He wouldn't. This Jessica Miller was a coincidence. She had to be. But as he stood there, in the silent tomb of his success, a cold dread told him he was lying to himself. The sun rose over Manhattan, but Jonathan Adler hadn't slept. He sat in his study, the photo album still open on his desk, a glass of untouched whiskey beside it. The first rays of dawn illuminated the face of the ghost he had spent half his life trying to forget. At precisely 7 a.m., his encrypted email chimed. The subject line was simple: JM Dossier. It was from Robert. Jonathan's hand trembled slightly as he opened the file. The first page was a standard background check summary. Name Jessica Miller. Age 28, address apt, 4B 1812, Nostrand Avenue, Brooklyn, Nutwawas. Currently 3 months behind on rent eviction, notice filed employment. The Gilded Sparrow Waitress, 3 years. The Daily Grind, Cafe Barista. Part-time, 4 years. Education, currently enrolled in night classes at City College of New York, pursuing a BS in computer engineering. GPA 3.9. Jonathan's breath hitched. Computer engineering. Just like David. He scrolled down, his heart pounding a heavy, frantic rhythm against his ribs. Financial status. Significant medical debt. Multiple maxed-out credit cards. Savings account balance, 87,40. Family. Mother Helen Miller. Age 59. Unemployed due to chronic health issues. Congestive heart failure. Resides with daughter. Father David Miller. Deceased. The word hung on the screen, stark and brutal. Deceased. He knew David was dead, but seeing it there, linked directly to the name Jessica Miller, made it real in a way it hadn't been for 20 years. He forced himself to click on the hyperlink attached to his father's name. A new page opened. It was a collection of public records newspaper clippings and archived business filings. It told a story he knew all too well, but from the other side. It detailed the meteoric rise and catastrophic fall of Innovate Dynamics, the company he and David had started in that garage. It showed the patent filings, both their names listed as co-inventors on the revolutionary data compression algorithm that had been their masterpiece. Then the narrative turned dark. It detailed the lawsuit. Cygnus Corp versus Innovate Dynamics. It mentioned an anonymous source who provided Cygnus with evidence that David Miller had allegedly used proprietary code belonging to them, a lie Jonathan had fabricated and fed to Cygnus himself. He had created a backdoor in their code, inserted a fragment of a Cygnus open-source library, and then pointed their lawyers to it. It was his checkmate move. The result was an injunction, a frozen company, and a ruined reputation for David. The dossier included a scanned newspaper article from the time. A grainy photo of David leaving a courthouse, his face pale and haunted, his kind eyes filled with a bewilderment that twisted Jonathan's gut. The headline read, "Local Tech Visionary, Accused of Corporate Espionage." Jonathan had swooped in, offering to buy David's shares for pennies on the dollar to avoid complete bankruptcy. A mercy killing, he'd called it. David, broken and buried in legal fees, had no choice but to sign. 2 weeks later, Jonathan dropped the lawsuit he had secretly orchestrated, sold the core algorithm, now solely in his name, to a larger firm for a fortune, and used that capital to found Adler Innovations. The dossier was meticulous. It included David Miller's death certificate. Cause of death, massive myocardial infarction. Date of death, 18 months after he signed away his company. He was 45 years old. The final section of the report was about Jessica. It included her high school records, valedictorian, her personal essays for college applications, full of passion for technology and a desire to honor her father's legacy, and the string of low-wage jobs she had worked since she was 16 to support her mother. Jonathan pushed his chair back from the desk, a wave of nausea washing over him. The bland risotto from the night before was a distant memory. The acidic taste in his mouth now was pure, unadulterated guilt. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a reckoning. The woman he had dismissed, the woman whose service he had deemed worthless, was the daughter of the man he had destroyed. She was working 2 jobs to pay for her sick mother's medication, while pursuing the very dream he had stolen from her father. The eviction notice, the medical debt, the $87 in her savings account. He saw his own fingerprints all over the wreckage of her life. His carefully constructed world built on the mantra of, "It's just business," shattered into a million pieces. This wasn't business. This was a scar on his soul. And last night, he had poured salt directly into the wound. The zero on the tip line was no longer an act of arrogance. It was a final, unknowing desecration of David Miller's memory. He picked up his phone, his hand shaking so much he could barely dial. "Robert," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Cancel everything. My entire day. My entire week." "Sir, is everything all right?" "No, Robert," Jonathan said, staring at the picture of young David Miller on his screen. "Nothing is right at all." Guilt was a paralytic. For 2 days, Jonathan Adler did nothing. He remained cloistered in his penthouse, the dossier open on his laptop, a silent testament to his sins. He reread every line, every soul-crushing detail of the life he had broken. What could he do? Write a check, a large, anonymous donation. It felt disgustingly inadequate, an insult to the scale of the damage, an apology. The words felt hollow before they were even formed. "I'm sorry I destroyed your father, bankrupted your family, and indirectly caused his death. Here's $1 million. It was grotesque. He needed to understand. He needed to see her not as a file on a screen, but as a person. On the third evening, he did something he hadn't done in 30 years. He took a yellow cab. He gave the driver the address for the Gilded Sparrow, but told him to park across the street. He wore a simple cashmere sweater slacks and a baseball cap pulled low over his face, a pathetic attempt at anonymity. He sat in the back of the cab for nearly 2 hours, the meter running, watching the restaurant's entrance. He saw her arrive for her shift. Her shoulders slumped with a weariness that was palpable even from across the street. He watched as she disappeared inside. He couldn't bring himself to go in. Not yet. The next day, he went to her other job, the Daily Grind Cafe, in a bustling Brooklyn neighborhood. It was a world away from the Gilded Sparrow. The air smelled of burnt coffee and sugar. The noise was a chaotic blend of grinding beans and loud chatter. He took a small table in the corner and ordered a black coffee he never intended to drink. He watched Jessica behind the counter. Here she was, different. Faster more, stressed a frantic blur of motion. He saw her deftly handle a complicated 6-drink order, while simultaneously placating a customer whose muffin was too crumbly. He saw her flash a genuine, brilliant smile at a toddler in a stroller, and then he saw something that stopped his breath. An elderly woman, a regular by the looks of it, fumbled with her purse, her hands shaking from what looked like Parkinson's disease. She dropped her change coins, scattering across the floor. Before anyone else could react, Jessica was out from behind the counter, kneeling on the dirty floor, her waitress apron brushing against grime. "Don't you worry, Mary," Jessica said, her voice full of a warmth he hadn't heard before. "We'll get it." She gently picked up each coin, her hands covering the old woman's, and helped her put them back in her purse. She then went back behind the counter, poured a coffee, and slid it towards the woman. "This one's on me." Jonathan sat frozen in his chair. In that small act of kindness, he saw David. He saw the same innate decency, the same gentle spirit that he had once mistaken for weakness. He had crushed that spirit in David, but here it was alive and defiant in his daughter. A daughter who was kneeling on a filthy floor because she couldn't afford to not have this second job. A job she had because of him. He left the cafe leaving a $50 bill for a $2 coffee and walked aimlessly through the streets of Brooklyn. He was a ghost in her world. He saw the pawn shops, the check-cashing places, the signs for legal aid. This was the landscape of the life he had created for her. His phone buzzed. It was Robert. "Sir, I have an update on Project Chimera. The board is getting extremely anxious. Cygnus Corp has made a counteroffer for the target company, Next Gen Dynamics. We need to respond within 48 hours or we lose the deal." Jonathan stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. Next Gen Dynamics, the company he was trying to acquire. The crown jewel of their portfolio was a new predictive analytics engine software, so advanced it was poised to revolutionize supply chain management. He had read their technical specs, the architecture, the foundational code. It was eerily familiar. He hung up on Robert and made another call this time to his head of R&D. "Henry, it's Adler," he said. "Next Gen Dynamics. I want you to do a deep source analysis of their core Pathfinder algorithm. Compare it against the original patent filings from Innovate Dynamics circa 25 years ago, the compression algorithm. The old Miller-Adler patent, sir, that's ancient tech. Just do it, Henry," Jonathan ordered. "I need to know if Pathfinder could have been built without our original code as a foundation. I need to know its lineage. Now." A new terrifying thought was taking root in his mind. The legacy he was trying to buy with Project Chimera, the final capstone of his career. What if it wasn't his legacy at all? What if, all this time, he had been chasing the ghost of David Miller's genius? He felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the entire concrete world he had built for himself was nothing but a house of cards in a hurricane. And the hurricane had a name, Jessica Miller. The call from Henry came less than 24 hours later. Jonathan answered on the first ring. "It's remarkable, Mr. Adler," Henry said, his voice buzzing with the excitement of a true engineer. "The Pathfinder algorithm isn't just based on the old Innovate Dynamics code. It's a direct evolution. It's like finding a modern jet engine that still uses the original Wright brothers' blueprints for its core principles. Whoever built Next Gen took your foundational work and spent 2 decades perfecting and expanding it. Without the Miller-Adler algorithm, Pathfinder wouldn't exist. It's in its DNA." Jonathan closed his eyes. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening finality. He was about to spend $12 billion to acquire a company whose value was derived directly from the technology he had stolen from David. He was in essence buying back his own stolen goods at an infinitely inflated price. The irony was so profound it was almost poetic. This was his chance. A check was an insult. An apology was air. But this was tangible. This was legacy. It was a path to a kind of redemption that money alone couldn't buy. For the first time in days, the paralysis lifted, replaced by a frantic, obsessive energy. He summoned Robert and his personal legal team to his penthouse. For the next 36 hours, they worked around the clock, fueled by coffee and Jonathan's relentless drive. They weren't working on the acquisition anymore. They were working on something far more complex. Jonathan laid out his plan. It was audacious, legally labyrinthine, and completely unprecedented. First, he began pacing his study like a caged lion. "We are withdrawing our offer for Next Gen Dynamics." His lawyers stared at him aghast. "Mr. Adler, the market will panic. Our stock will plummet." "Let it," Jonathan shot back. "We're going to leak the reason why. We'll release Henry's analysis. We'll show the world that Next Gen's entire valuation is built on the intellectual property of a defunct company called Innovate Dynamics." "That's our IP, sir," one lawyer protested. "We can sue them into oblivion." "It's not our IP," Jonathan corrected his voice, dropping. "It's their IP. David Miller and Jonathan Adler, 50-50 partners." The room fell silent. Robert Coleman looked at his boss, seeing a man he barely recognized. The ruthless shark was gone, replaced by someone with a burning, almost fanatical sense of purpose. "Step 2, Jonathan continued. "We are establishing a new foundation. It will be called the David Miller Foundation for Ethical Innovation. Its charter will be to fund and support young engineers and tech startups that are often overlooked by traditional venture capital, with a strict focus on ethical development." He pointed to a stack of financial documents. "I am endowing the foundation with an initial grant of $1 billion of my personal shares in Adler Innovations." Gasps echoed through the room. "Step 3 is where it gets complicated," Jonathan said, taking a deep breath. "Adler Innovations will file a massive intellectual property lawsuit against Next-Gen Dynamics. But we will not be seeking monetary damages. We will be seeking equity, a controlling interest in their company, to be awarded not to Adler Innovations, but directly to a new trust." He slid a final document across the table. "This trust will be established for the sole legal heir of David Miller. All assets, all shares, all board seats won in the lawsuit will belong to this trust. It will be ironclad, irrevocable, and effective immediately." His lead counsel, a man named George Finney, looked pale. "Sir, you're talking about giving away control of what could be a multi-billion-dollar company, a company you were just about to buy." "I'm not giving it away, George," Jonathan said, his voice raw with an emotion his team had never heard from him. "I'm giving it back." There was one final detail. The pen. The obsidian pen that had started it all. He still hadn't retrieved it. It was the one thing he couldn't delegate. It was the invitation he had to extend himself. He instructed Robert to make a call, not to Jessica, but to the manager of the Gilded Sparrow. He booked the entire restaurant for the following evening, a private event. He requested a single table be set table 12, and he asked that Jessica Miller be the only server on duty, paid triple her normal rate for the night. He had built an empire on a foundation of betrayal. Now he was going to try and build a bridge back to the world he had destroyed, using the very same stones. He only prayed she would be willing to walk across it. The Gilded Sparrow was eerily silent. The usual symphony of quiet chatter and clinking glasses was gone, replaced by a heavy, expectant hush. A single table was set, a small island of white linen in a sea of empty chairs. Jessica Miller stood by the service station, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had been told only that a VIP had booked the entire restaurant and specifically requested her. She smoothed down her crisp apron, her hands trembling slightly. She knew who it was. She had been dreading, and in a strange way, anticipating this moment since she had refused to hand over the pen. In her pocket, the pen felt like a block of ice. At exactly 8:00 p.m., Jonathan Adler walked through the doors. He wasn't wearing his usual armor of a power suit. He was dressed in a simple dark sweater and trousers looking older and smaller than she remembered. He walked directly to table 12 and sat down, his eyes finding hers across the empty room. Jessica took a deep breath, picked up a water pitcher, and walked towards him. Her footsteps echoed on the polished floor. She filled his glass, her movements fluid and professional, betraying none of a turmoil inside her. "Good evening, Mr. Adler," she said, her voice steady. "Jessica," he began, his own voice raspy. "Please, sit down." She hesitated. "I'm on duty, sir. I've booked the entire restaurant so that you wouldn't be," he said gently. "Please." She pulled out the chair opposite him and sat the formal place setting, feeling like a barrier between them. They sat in silence for a long moment. "You have something of mine," he finally said. Jessica reached into her pocket and placed the obsidian pen on the table. It lay between them, a silent witness. She pushed it slowly across the linen. He didn't pick it up. He just looked at it. My partner, David Miller, gave that to me 27 years ago. The inscription, DM, stands for his name. Jessica's blood ran cold, even though she had suspected it. Hearing him say it, confirming the link between this powerful, arrogant man and her gentle, lost father, was a shock that resonated deep in her bones. "He was my father," she said, her voice a whisper. Jonathan flinched, the words hitting him with the physical force he knew they would. He finally met her eyes, and she saw not arrogance or impatience, but a deep, profound brokenness. "I know," he said. "Jessica, I didn't know that night. I swear to you I didn't know it was you. Not that it excuses my behavior. Nothing can." He took a shaky breath and began to speak. He told her everything. He started with the garage, the shared dreams, the brotherhood he had with her father. He spoke of David's brilliance, his kindness, his trust, and then, his voice cracking, he confessed the betrayal. He detailed the fabricated lawsuit, the hostile takeover, the theft of the algorithm. He spared no detail of his own treachery. He didn't make excuses. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply laid the ugly, unvarnished truth on the table between them. Jessica listened, her face, a pale, still mask. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks, but she made no sound. The vague, shadowy story of a nameless villain that had haunted her childhood was suddenly being given a face and a voice. It was the face of the man who had refused to tip her. When he was finished, the silence returned heavier than before. "He died," she said, her voice choked with 2 decades of grief. "He had a heart attack. The doctors said it was stress. He just gave up. My mother, she's been sick ever since. Do you have any idea what you did to us?" "To him?" "I can't know," Jonathan whispered, his own eyes shining with unshed tears. "But I can see it. And I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to atone for it." He pushed a thick leather portfolio across the table. "This isn't charity, Jessica. This is restitution. It's a restoration of what should have been." Her hands shaking, she opened it. Inside were the documents establishing the David Miller Foundation for Ethical Innovation, the endowment of $1 billion, the plans for the lawsuit against Next Gen Dynamics, and finally the charter for the trust naming her Jessica Miller as the sole beneficiary and heir to her father's stolen legacy. She looked up from the papers, her eyes wide with disbelief and 1,000 other conflicting emotions. "What is this?" "It's your father's company," Jonathan said. "It's the evolution of his genius. I'm just giving it back to its rightful owner. You will have a board seat on the foundation. You will control the trust. You can use it to finish your degree, to take care of your mother, to build whatever you want, to honor his name in a way I failed to do." Jessica stared at him, the man who was both her family's destroyer and its potential savior. The anger was still there, a hot coal in her chest, but it was now mingled with a bewildering sense of shock and a flicker of something else. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But understanding. She was looking at a man trapped in a prison of his own, desperately searching for a key. "Why?" she asked, the single word encompassing everything. "Why do all this?" Jonathan finally reached out and picked up the pen. He turned it over and over in his hands, looking at the inscription. "Because he was my friend," he said softly. "And because when I looked at the 0, I wrote on that bill. And then I learned who you were. I realized my entire life, all the billions, the buildings, the power, it all added up to that same number, a perfect empty 0. Your father was the one, I was the zero. I'm just trying to finally balance the equation. Jessica didn't give him an answer that night. She took the portfolio and walked out of the silent restaurant, leaving Jonathan Adler alone at table 12. She didn't forgive him, but as she stepped out into the cool night air, she felt the crushing weight of the last 20 years begin to lift, replaced by the first tentative light of a future she never dared to imagine, a future built on the restored legacy of her father, David Miller. 2 years passed. The city's pulse beat on, indifferent to the lives it had altered. But for Jessica Miller and Jonathan Adler, those 2 years contained a lifetime of change. Jessica no longer wore a waitress's apron. She now wore a tailored blazer, not for the sake of corporate conformity, but because it gave her confidence when she stood before a room of ambitious young engineers. She had graduated from City College summa cum laude, her final thesis on neural network architecture being published in a respected academic journal. But her true work was at the downtown office of the David Miller Foundation for Ethical Innovation. The foundation wasn't a sterile, bureaucratic charity. It was a vibrant incubator of ideas. The walls were covered in whiteboards, filled with complex algorithms and flowcharts. The air hummed with the energy of creation. Jessica was its heart. She didn't just sign checks. She mentored, she challenged, and she championed the kinds of brilliant, unassuming minds that the corporate world, in its relentless pursuit of profit, would have otherwise overlooked. She sought out the Davids of the world. Her mother, Helen, was a new woman, with access to the best cardiologists and free from the crushing weight of financial anxiety. A light had returned to her eyes. They now lived in a comfortable brownstone in Park Slope. One crisp autumn afternoon, they stood together before David Miller's grave. For the first time, the headstone was not a symbol of a life cut short, but a legacy reclaimed. "He would be so proud of you, Jessie," Helen said, her voice thick with emotion, as she placed a bouquet of his favorite yellow roses on the stone. "Not because of the money, but because you're finishing his work. You've given him his voice back." Jessica leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "I just wish he was here to see it." "Maybe he is," Helen whispered. "Maybe he is." Meanwhile, Jonathan Adler had receded from the world. He had stepped down as CEO of Adler Innovations a year after their meeting, retaining a quiet seat on the board, but relinquishing all operational control. The business world had been stunned. The official story was retirement. The unofficial rumors, fueled by the creation of the Miller Foundation and the unusual lawsuit against Next Gen Dynamics, which had settled giving the foundation a 25% equity stake, painted a picture of a man atoning for sins no one could quite name. He lived in the same sterile penthouse, but it felt different now. Less a fortress of power, more a quiet monastery of reflection. He followed the foundation's progress, obsessively reading every press release, every profile on the startups it funded. He watched Jessica's occasional television interviews, a ghost observing a world he had set in motion but could never be a part of. He never reached out. He knew he had no right. The portfolio he had given her was a confession and a sentence, not an invitation. The first annual Miller Prize for Innovation was held in a grand ballroom at the New York Public Library. Jessica, standing at the podium, looked out at the sea of faces, the brightest young minds in technology, ethical investors and academics. She spoke about her father not as a victim, but as a visionary whose principles were more important now than ever. As she concluded her speech to a standing ovation, her eyes scanned the room. In the farthest, darkest corner, almost hidden behind a marble pillar, she saw him. Jonathan Adler, looking frail in a simple suit, his hands clasped in front of him. He wasn't applauding. He was simply watching her, his face a complex mask of sorrow, pride, and awe. Their eyes met for a brief electric moment across the crowded room. Jessica's heart gave a complicated flutter. She gave him the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. It was not forgiveness. It was not friendship. It was an acknowledgement, a recognition that their shared, painful history had against all odds created something good. Later, as the event was winding down, she found him standing by the exit, preparing to slip away unnoticed. "Mr. Adler," she said, her voice causing him to startle. He turned to face her. "Jessica, you've done remarkable work. Your father—" "I have something for you," she interrupted softly, not wanting to fall into the chasm of things left unsaid between them. She reached into her clutch and pulled out the obsidian pen. She held it out to him. Jonathan looked at the pen, then back at her, his eyes filled with confusion. "I can't." "I think you should have it," she insisted. "My mother and I, we have his legacy now. We have the foundation. We have his name cleared and celebrated. That's all we ever needed. This," she gestured to the pen, "this is part of your story. A reminder." He hesitated, then slowly reached out and took it. The cool, heavy object felt different in his hand now. It was no longer a talisman of his ruthless ascent, but a symbol of his long, painful journey back. "The first step is the hardest," Jessica said, quoting the inscription he now knew by heart. "You took it. That has to count for something." She turned and walked back into the warmth and light of the ballroom, back to the future she was building. Jonathan Adler stood alone in the cool entryway, the pen clutched in his hand. He looked down at the inscription from the friend he had betrayed, an object returned to him by the daughter he had wronged. The equation of his life, once a stark and soulless zero, had finally painfully begun to find its balance. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt a flicker not of triumph or of guilt, but of peace. A single moment of disrespect can be a window into a lifetime of regret. The story of Jonathan Adler and Jessica Miller isn't just about a missed tip. It's a powerful reminder that our actions, big and small, create ripples we may not see for decades. It shows us that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in integrity, and that even the most profound mistakes can be seeds for redemption if one is brave enough to face the truth. Can a lifetime of damage ever truly be undone? Can forgiveness be earned, or is it something that can only be given? This story leaves us with those questions, reminding us to look beyond the surface, to treat everyone with dignity, because we never truly know the history of the person standing right in front of us. If this story moved, you please hit the like button, share it with someone who appreciates powerful real-life drama, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories that reveal the hidden truths of the human heart. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update.